Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I am delighted to welcome on Ashley Douglas to discuss her upcoming book, With My Own Hand, The Secret Life of Marie Maitland, Scotland's 16th century Sappho. Ashley Douglas is a Scottish historian and translator. Ashley has 2 master's degrees, one in Scottish Historical Studies from the University of St Andrews and another in archaeology from the University of the Highlands and Islands. Since graduating in 2016, Ashley has developed a national profile and successful freelance career as a translator, historian, speaker, and consultant, specialising in LGBT history and the Scots language. She has worked with and written for a range of national heritage, literary, and educational organisations. In 2023, Ashley was named as one of the 15 most influential women in culture in Scotland, in a list created to mark International Women's Day. In 2024, she consulted on Catherine, James V, the latest instalment in Rona Munro's acclaimed The James Plays series. She is currently consulting on James VI, which will be staged in 2027. Ashley is the author of the essay My Sapphic City, which was published as part of the anthology Who Will Be Remembered Here. She is also the author of The Lass and the Quine, the first ever original LGBT inclusive children's book in the Scots language. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley. How are you?
Very well. I'm excited to talk to you about Marie Maitland.
I am so excited for today because I've never heard of Marie, and your book is the first book about her. But I think before we get on to Marie, could you tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. So I am a Scottish historian, translator, and author, and I specialise in both the Scots language and LGBT history. So for that reason, Marie is a very fascinating and on-point topic for me because we're combining both lesbian history and Scots language history, Scots still being the language of Scotland in the 16th century. And I studied Scottish history at the University of St Andrews, which is pleasingly Scotland's oldest university and actually features in a lot of the period that I study. So that's always kind of cool.
What inspired you to write this biography?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've already touched on it a wee bit because the fact of the matter is that nobody has written about Marie Maitland before. So that's the very straightforward answer. Like literally, there has never been a book telling her life story before. So that was the main drive. But then why write about her is because she's an absolutely remarkable figure. So Marie lived more than 400 years ago in 16th century Scotland, and we're talking Reformation era Scotland. Just after the Protestant Reformation of 1560 is when she is a young woman and living out her adult life. And this is such a hostile context for women. It's certainly a hostile context for women who love other women. And despite this, in this most hostile of climate, Marie lives a remarkably independent life for the most part as a woman. And not only that, she is also a woman who loves other women, and she writes passionate lesbian love poetry to another woman. So she is objectively such a significant figure in Scottish history, women's history, and LGBT history. And also in the global context, because the poetry that Marie writes in the 1500s in historical Scots, the lesbian poetry, is some of the earliest known lesbian love poetry in the whole of Europe since Sappho herself. Sappho being, of course, the ancient Greek poet who wrote lesbian love poems and therefore gave us the very words sapphic and lesbian from Sappho of Lesbos, which we still use to describe women who love women today. So Marie is just a fantastic and remarkable figure in her own context of 16th century Scotland, and then in this global narrative of women's and lesbian history. So as soon as I found out about her, I was absolutely enthralled. And then when nobody else has written the book about her, you kind of have to. It wasn't really a choice. It's like, nobody else has done this. I guess I'm doing it.
So you said about obviously Marie wrote lesbian poetry. How did you discover these entries?
Yeah, so as I said at the start, my two specialisms are Scots language history and latterly, really, LGBT history. So the manuscript that Marie included her lesbian love poetry and that she slipped in among other poems is quite a well-known Scottish manuscript from the 16th century. I say well-known, it's not well-known, I don't think, in the wider public consciousness, but certainly if you're a scholar of early modern Scotland and Scots language, you're going to be aware of this manuscript. It's called the Maitland Quarto manuscript. So I was aware of this, but I thought it was just a manuscript containing poems by men, poems by Marie's father, Sir Richard Maitland, who was a poet. There's poems in there by King James VI of Scotland, also later James I of England, but in Marie's lifetime, he's just James VI. I know that'll be jarring probably for English listeners, but just James VI, he's not James I yet as well. He was also a very accomplished Scots language poet. So there's poems by him in there, and there's poems by other men, the male great and good of 16th century Scotland. So I had this manuscript in my head as that, a significant Scots language manuscript of poems by men. And I was interested enough in it on that basis. So I was consulting it. This is like 2020, 2021, I think. And I was just thinking I was going to be reading historical Scots poetry, which was, as I said, that was exciting enough. I was happy with that. But when I opened the manuscript, and I should say this was a later print edition of the manuscript that I was dealing with, this was not me sitting down with the original ink and quill. This is like a 1920 print edition in the National Library of Scotland. But I opened it, and on the front page, there's this woman's name twice emblazoned, Marie Maitland, and the year 1586. So I was immediately thinking, what's this? Who's this woman with her name emblazoned twice on this page? And I kept going through it, and right enough, there were poems by Sir Richard Maitland, as I expected. I found the one by King James and all of that. But in amongst these, I also kept stumbling upon unattributed poems, anonymous poems. And a lot of these poems were in female voice. And one of these poems was even a love poem, like very much. That was like, this is a woman writing a love poem to another woman. And you can imagine, I'm thinking, what is going on here? I've never heard of, I'm aware of this manuscript, but I've never heard about that it contains lesbian love poems. What is going on here? Who's Marie Maitland? Um, and what was going on. So from that moment on, I started researching Marie's life and also sharing the significance of this manuscript because obviously also as a lesbian who previously had only heard of like Sappho and Anne Lister, you don't think that these figures are in your history. I kind of assumed that if there was an iconic lesbian in Scotland's history at the time of Mary Queen of Scots, I might have heard of her before studying Scottish history. So I was immediately like, this is really important and this
Yeah.
needs to be known. So from that point on, I did an initial blog piece with the National Library of Scotland for LGBT History Month, February 2021. I wrote about poem 49 is like one of the most explicit lesbian poems in the manuscript. It's technically anonymous. It's clearly by Marie. It's just unsigned. And since then, I've been sharing the significance of that poem and of Marie's status as evidence of a woman who loved other women. And this time I've worked with educational charities to tell these stories in schools and everything as well. And so that was based on the manuscript. And at the same time, though, I began researching her life because obviously, having stumbled upon her manuscript, I then wanted to know everything I could about this woman. It was clear to me already, just from reading the manuscript, that it was by her, that it contained lesbian love poems by her. But I really needed to know more about Marie Maitland, and there's very little. You'll know in researching for this interview that there's very little out there. You'll find a Wikipedia entry that's limited and also has errors in it. You'll not be surprised to hear. There's like a wee entry in Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, which again is limited and unfortunately also contains errors because I've now spent 5 years digging into primary records myself. So yeah, in parallel with sharing the significance of the manuscript and the lesbian poetry, particularly poem 49, I've also spent the past 5 years in the archives looking for records of Marie's life, and what a life. I had no idea what I was going to find when I went looking. I had this manuscript and these poems and this name, and you know what it's like yourself. You don't know what's going to be there in the archives. I could have found nothing. I could have found nothing, and I would still like to think that I would have written a book about the manuscript and the poetry. But instead, I found so many records, original manuscript records from the 16th century, untranscribed, unseen for centuries. And it is that story that I tell based on those primary records that have been unseen for centuries. You're not even going to stumble upon them on the internet anywhere on Wikipedia or anything that they're unknown about. I've found them, transcribed them, I'm sharing them for the first time. So in the book, what you get is both Marie's life story, her remarkable life story, and the story of the manuscript that she wrote interwoven.
I mean, I think that's just incredible. I can't imagine you just open it and be like, what have I found? And then it's kind of railroaded into this remarkable discovery. And
Yeah.
you're finally giving her voice back again. Like it seems her voice has just been completely lost over time. And I think it's incredible that it's coming back today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Now, you said obviously you discussed the manuscript that she's had direct involvement in and her life. Do we know much about Marie's early life?
Yeah, we can certainly know the broad outlines of it. You'll know yourself with this period of history, everything's a bit caveated and unsecure. But Marie was born most likely in the late 1540s, and she's born into a family called the Maitlands of Lethington. So they are a landed family of lowland Scotland, and they're totally enmeshed in Scottish political and court life. So her father, we've mentioned him already, Sir Richard Maitland, he's a poet and a historian, a collector, but he's also a statesman and a judge. So, for example, he serves as Keeper of the Privy Seal to Mary Queen of Scots. And then Marie's eldest brother, William Maitland of Lethington, people might be familiar with as Secretary Lethington to Mary Queen of Scots. So he pops up at the English court quite a lot. He's Scotland's ambassador to England. So he's quite interwoven with Cecil and Elizabeth I and all of that as well. Elizabeth I calls him the flower of the wits of Scotland. So this is Marie's eldest brother. And then another brother worth mentioning is John Maitland. He will later be Chancellor to James VI of Scotland. So just from that broad overview, we get the sense that she's not born into a normal family. This is a very politically significant family. And Marie also has three older sisters. And as with most women at this time, when they appear in the record, it's just their marriage. It's just they come of age, they're married off, they bear children, end of. And really, this should have been the case for Marie as well. She's the fourth daughter of a landed family. It's post-Reformation Scotland by the time she's ready to wed. So said she was born in the late 1540s. When she's a young teen, just on the cusp of womanhood, we have the Scottish Reformation in 1560. What a time to have been born into. You've got this like overnight revolution. So that's what Marie experiences firsthand. So you can't even be a nun anymore. If she had potentially harbored any hopes of going down that path by the time she comes of age, it's not even an option. In post-Reformation Scotland, nunneries are abolished, monasteries are abolished. For women, it is marriage or marriage. And yet Marie doesn't marry when she comes of age, and this is because of a twist of fate. And the twist of fate is that in 1561, so to put this in context, just the year after the Reformation, and it's also the year that Mary Queen of Scots returns to Scotland, having been in France. So that's what's going on in Scotland. And at this time, Sir Richard Maitland, Marie's father, goes blind. He entirely loses his eyesight. And this is really the twist of fate that changes Marie's life path in a way that would otherwise have been unthinkable. Because now, instead of preparing for marriage, which she should have done, she instead becomes her blind father's secretary. And because she's performing that role for her father, she manages to get an opt out from immediately marrying and bearing children. And instead, for the next decades, for most of her adult life, she actually serves as her father's secretary. Therefore, she enhances her own education. She also gains great financial autonomy because the point is obviously for women now, when you can only marry, you also need to marry because it's the way you get social and financial security. You know, women obviously can't be independent in any meaningful way. You can't earn your own money or anything. You have to marry. Marie is not marrying because she's serving as secretary to her father. And this goes on for such a long time that she goes past the age at which she should marry. Like 18 is the average age for women of Marie's elite status to marry, and they would certainly be married off by their early 20s. But Marie stays in this role for so long that she goes all the way through her 20s, she's approaching 30, she's into her 30s. And at a certain point, her family obviously accept that by the time her father dies, and therefore she's not needed as his secretary anymore, she's going to be too old to marry. So this is a problem because then how is she going to have any financial or social security? So what we find in the records, and this is so exciting, this is the stuff that I was finding, is that instead of the financial security of marriage, Marie Maitland is set up with a whole series of independent financial incomes set up under her father for her to live off in the event of his death. So it's clearly been decided that Marie is never going to marry. She's serving her father as secretary while he's alive. And then once he passes, she's going to live out her days as an independent woman. One of the best records I found is Marie investing her dowry, literally investing the sum, because it's the same sum as the dowry for all of her sisters. So there's no question that this was the money that was meant to have been her dowry, should have been paid to a husband's family. And instead, we have a brilliant record of her investing this dowry money in an interest earning loan to a landed gentleman from the northeast of Scotland. And this is just phenomenal. So she's investing her dowry. She's got a whole host of other income. She's the teened or tithe, I think is said in English history, tithe holder of places in East Lothian where she's got so many income sources. Far too much money just to be her sort of disposable income. This is about setting her up for life once her father dies. So that is the life that Marie lives.
I think that's so incredible because, as you said, like women had such limited options in history, especially in the 16th century. You know, it is marriage or marriage. You haven't got any options. Were her family accepting that, she had no other path other than the one she was leading as an independent woman?
I think they were accepting of it to the extent that she was still serving her father, right? So, of course, she also wrote this secret lesbian love poetry, and we can read that in the manuscript. But to her family, to the society, this is Calvinist Scotland. There is absolutely no sense that her family or society would have known that she was a woman who loved other women and therefore probably quite happy to have an opt out of marriage, right? That's the sort of subtext to this whole story. On the face of it, to Calvinist Scottish society, although she's not marrying a man, she's still performing a very dutiful, appropriately feminine role, right? She's dutifully serving her father. So, and it's a very unique situation because not everybody's father is going to go blind. So although it's a unique situation and quite an abnormal situation, it is still in this Calvinist worldview an acceptable reason to not marry. She's only not marrying because she is sacrificing herself to the needs of her male superior. So that's still okay. So to that extent, then yes, her family were content for her to perform that role and then to live her life as an independent woman, to be financially supported to do that because she's almost like given up on marriage because she's serving her father.
Obviously, you said that in the, is it Maitland Quarto? Is that, yeah,
Yeah,
Maitland
that's
Quarto,
right.
about like lesbian poetry. Do we know anything about her actual life and her involvement with women?
Yeah, so what all we've got left of Marie in terms of her love and her relationship with another woman is that there are three lesbian love poems in this manuscript, and there's also really excitingly also a poem in this manuscript, an anonymous poem probably written by a woman who knew Marie that compares her to Sappho. So, in terms of evidence for Marie having been a woman who loved other women and wrote poetry about it, you really couldn't hope for better evidence than somebody literally comparing her to Sappho. So, there's that very strong sense that in her intimate friendship circle, she was known as a woman who loved other women and who wrote poetry to them. That's all preserved in this manuscript. The women that she writes one of her most powerful love poems to certainly would have been a woman of similar social status to her. We don't know her identity, unfortunately. That's where I just hit a research wall. I just cannot determine who the woman was. I've tried, I've thought of every avenue to try and get to it, but I still have a few ideas that I could follow up on. But for the sake of writing this book, I was like, I need to just write this book for now, and we'll see. So we don't know who exactly she was, but she was almost certainly a woman of similar elite status for a whole range of reasons. But one of which is that in the poem to her, the opening stanzas are just gushing adoration, and Marie praises her as hugely erudite and wise and learned. And Marie even says it's as if the goddess Pallas Athena has come back to life. So, this has to be a woman who's of similar social class to be so educated and wise. We also know from the same poem that Marie's lover, unlike her, does not have an opt-out and does get married off.
Mm.
And indeed, that's the sense that I have of why Marie was motivated to write this poem, which was still quite a dangerous thing to do in this climate. What moved Marie to actually enshrine her love in verse and then hide it in this manuscript anonymously, hidden among the poetry of men. It's both bold and careful at the same time what she's done. My sense is the occasion that prompted Marie to write this is her lover being married off to a man, because the first part of the poem is already just saying, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're more wise than a goddess, just all this. And then you get to the middle of the poem, and Marie says, I wish that I could be married to you instead of your husband. She literally says that. So there's so many things we could unpack from that. One point I'll say is that one, this is no way a friendship poem, because this is what you often get with LGBT history is something will look very gay, but people will say, oh, but could they just be really close friends? It's like, well, no, because she's literally saying, literally, I wish that I could be your husband. I want to marry you. Like, it's not a friend poem, it's a love poem. And the pain. So she says, and this is direct quotes from the poem, if we could be married, then we should not smert hurt. We should not hurt. And in the historical Scots, it's smert, as we do now unhappy women. So this is the words of the poem. Um, and then the end of the poem again is kind of more back to the love poem theme of like, even though we can't be married, I will still love you till the end of time. So, the poem's not abstract. It's not just an abstract love poem. It seems to be rooted in a particular moment and a
Mm.
particular situation. And to me, that situation seems very clearly to be Marie's lover. Not everybody has a blind father, right? If Marie's fallen in love with this young woman, of course she's going to have to marry. For what reason is she not going to have to marry? So when that inevitably happens, this is the poem that results. This is what prompts Marie to write these stanzas and to make her feel so powerfully. You can feel her pain and anger almost of like, this man that you've had to marry, he can't possibly love you as much as I do. And yet you can imagine it now as a modern person, like how you'd feel if somebody you loved was with somebody else, all of that. It's all in this poem.
I mean, it's just utterly remarkable that it's survived and we didn't know about. I still can't believe that we don't know about this. Like, because as you say, there's no hidden meaning in that poem. It's quite clear what she's saying, There's no skirting around it. No, she's saying that she wants to be the wife,
Yeah.
that's I want to be wife, you want to be my wife. Let's get rid of the like that's it.
Yeah.
Like that's the only meaning. How does she get these poems in there? Like, how does she get them in?
Yeah. So as I say, the manuscript is ultimately a manuscript of the poetry of the male great and good of 16th century Scotland. And this is the cover story. And the cover story has almost been too effective all the way down to the present day, right? Because even when I was going to look at this manuscript, that's what I thought it was. Oh, yeah, the Maitland Quarto, it's got poems by Sir Richard Maitland and King James and stuff. I didn't know it also had 30 odd anonymous poems, technically anonymous. I always say technically anonymous because they're not really meaningfully anonymous. Some of them are so obviously by Marie. A lot of them are obviously by women in general. Some of them are so obviously by Marie herself that they're not meaningfully anonymous. They're just technically unsigned rather than anonymous. But the narrative of this being a manuscript of the poetry of men, the poetry of Sir Richard Maitland, has been so powerful down the centuries that it's prevented people from looking at Marie's poems. And then unfortunately, and I can't speak for past scholars, but or what would cause them to say this and not read it for what it is, but there have been many occasions where people have read this poem 49, the one where Marie declares her desire to marry another woman, and genuinely have said this is a poem of friendship throughout scholarship. So, it's been a combination of the manuscript is not widely known outside of academia, I wouldn't say. So that kind of keeps it from a lot of people. And then scholars who have been engaging with it, there's been a bit of undermining it and not fully celebrating and recognizing it for what it is. And that's just one of the poems. So poem 49, that one is sometimes discussed in very academic context, but there are two other lesbian love poems in the manuscript which I have discerned, which have never been discussed as lesbian love poems before. So that's also very exciting.
How does Marie's life change? Because obviously we discussed before that she does get married. How does this change happen in her life?
Yeah, this is the kind of sad part. Most of the book is so uplifting and unique and remarkable female life, but unfortunately, yeah, the spoiler is it's not got a happy ending. And I was actually quite depressed when I was writing the last chapters. But what happens is that although while her father is alive, Marie is getting to live this unique, meaningfully independent life as a woman at this period. She's got financial independence, she's got a degree of social autonomy. She's not got a husband, she's not having to bear and rear children. And she's, most importantly, she's set up to also continue independently after her father's death. She's got all this money ready for her to fund her own residence and servants and household. There is no intention for her to marry. It is clear from so many of the records. There's no intention for her to marry. For example, she's also named nieces as substitute heirs to her incomes because obviously normally you would just say to my heirs and successors, and for most people this would be spouse and children. You wouldn't actually have to even say that. It'd just be obvious. Marie, and this is again examples of the primary records I've found that are just mind blowing. And here we have Marie naming nieces as substitute heirs. That is a big, massive signal that she has no intention of marrying and therefore having heirs of her own. Otherwise, why is she naming nieces as substitute heirs, right? And also that she chooses to name nieces rather than nephews. It's just
Yeah.
what a woman. Um, so this is all in place. Marie's financial independence. She's going to remain unwed after her father's death. And yet, when her father dies, she becomes essentially the property of her nearest male relative, which is her brother John, the baddie, baddie alert. Um, and he marries her off. Like the long and short of it is he just swiftly marries her off. She's like 40 by this point. She's so far past this. The average age of marriage was 18 for a woman of Marie's status. They'd certainly be married off by their early 20s. She's like 40 years old. She has no financial need to marry. Nobody's expecting her to marry, certainly not her. And yet, within weeks of her father's death, her brother has negotiated her a marriage and has her married off. And it's actually ended up being one of the longest chapters in the book to go into the political background. I won't
Yeah.
bore your podcast listeners with it. It's all in the book if you want to know what exactly was going on. But John is a fixer. He's a political fixer.
Right.
He's the king's man. There's essentially political problems going on with another landed family called the Lauders of Halton. They're really giving the king and the court a headache. And by marrying his sister to the son and heir of this house, he manages to solve a bunch of political problems. That's what goes on. So that's what happens. He essentially gets a new card to play. He's been trying to manage these problems for some time already while his father's still alive. But once his father dies, he suddenly has like a new card to play in the form of an unwed sister, and he plays that card. So Marie, at the age of about 40, finds herself married off to like a 20 something in a highly political, very odd, very strained marriage. As I say, I go into detail all the records around it. I think it's chapter 8 of the book. But that's what happens to Marie at 40. And then she dies not too long after, most likely as the result of childbirth, the aftermath of childbirth, because she's obviously quite old by this point.
Mm.
She's really well past optimal childbearing age. And we know that she dies in 1596. So she's married off in 1586. She dies in 1596. That's what we know. And we also know that she leaves behind 4 children under the age of 10. That's a lot of
Yeah.
pregnancies and birth for a woman approaching 50. And my strong sense, although the records don't say this specifically, my strong sense is that she will have died in childbirth or not long after from the fourth one.
I mean, it's just so sad because, as you say, there's so much remarkable about Marie, and then it's kind of she has to conform back into society, and it's like that shouldn't have been how it ended for her. And I think that is honestly so sad.
It is sad at the end. I know it's like she got a pass for so long. She got away with it for so long, but at the end of the day, reality kicked back in, and it's like you're never a woman in your own right, are you? You're always somebody's daughter or sister or wife, and that she ended up back there eventually.
How much have you enjoyed bringing Marie to the limelight?
Do you know, that's a tricky question because it is obviously a real honor and exciting to be sharing this remarkable women's story with the world for the first time. But at the same time, it is also a wee bit regrettable that it has taken to like 2026 and that it's taken a lesbian woman to do it because the records of Marie's life have always been there. The manuscript is right there with the lesbian love poetry, quite obviously, with her name on the title page and the lesbian love poetry. The manuscript's always been there, has always been known about. And then the records that I've gone and found, yeah, okay, they've not been transcribed or anything, but they're there in major sources for Scottish history. In the places like the National Archive, so places that historians are in and researching all the time. So partly very exciting and an honor to be doing it, and partly I think quite dismaying that it has taken until today, and it's taken a lesbian to go find this significant story because it really shouldn't fall to LGBT people ourselves to go and hunt out and tell our own histories because other people have failed or refused to do so. So that's a bit of a mix that I wish I could just say, yeah, it's amazing, but it's a bit more nuanced.
No, I think you're completely right. I think why should this history be suppressed almost? Because you're right. It's very obviously there. As you say, you kind of opened it and it's like, well, okay, then why has this never been discussed? It does need to be discussed more. And you're right. Why are we still in 2026 making these discoveries? This should be well known and circulated. But you are doing fantastic work. So as you say, you've been working with the educational, I can't remember what it said now. Is the educational, no, it's gone.
Educational charity. Wait, we can edit this, but yeah, we can
Yeah.
edit. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
The educational charity. It's called Time for Inclusive Education in Scotland.
which again is what is if it is needed, and not just in Scotland, it's in England and Wales, it's everywhere. We need to have a more diverse history because this isn't shameful. This is fascinating and interesting, and more importantly, real as well.
Yeah, completely. And that's what I'm always at pains to say. This isn't viewing history through a queer lens or anything. This is literally just what the records say. It's maybe a bit controversial, but I kind of push against the idea of like queering the past or anything like that because this is not queering the past. This is just history as it happened. This is me just telling what the records say. I'm not reading it through a queer lens. I'm not reading in stuff that's not there. It's like this is an objective reading of these records. And it is just as much a part of history as any other part of history. It's just history that hasn't been told yet. And I think especially at one of the best known parts of Scottish history, like Mary Queen of Scots, John Knox, Scottish Reformation. This is one of the best studied and known and popular parts of Scottish history. And Marie Maitland's story is just as much a part of that history as any other. It's just not been told.
Towards the end of the podcast, I like to ask my guests five fun history questions. So, firstly, have you got a historical pet peeve?
I do, and it's when people don't cite primary records. Um, so when you're reading like a secondary literature book and they'll just say something like really cool or really interesting, but then they give no reference. You're like, how did you get that? Or and then suppose connected to that is where they just reference another secondary source, and then it's just like secondary sources referencing each other around in circles. And I'm like, yeah, but what's the primary record for this? And I found this all the way through my research on Marie and her family, but you see it in relation to all sorts of things. I find it quite often in relation also in my period to like Darnley and Rizzio
Mm.
and, rumors or facts about their relationship or not. You'll find all sorts of things being said in books and secondary literature, but rarely will they point you to primary sources. And I want to go and see the manuscript record where this apparently, and it's not like I'm saying I disbelieve it. I'm just like, I want to see the source. So yeah, yeah, when people aren't sharing their primary sources and just citing I'm always suspicious of a book that would only cite secondary sources.
If you could go back in time to any event or day in history, when would it be and why?
This one is really easy for me because it would definitely be to the building of the Great Pyramids because they're just so cool. My wife and I went on holiday to Egypt a few years ago and it was just magnificent, like standing at the base of the Great Pyramid. I was like quite overwhelmed. It was amazing. But the idea that we don't know how they were built
Yeah.
still, do you know, it just absolutely bamboozles me. These millennia old structures that you can see from space and we still genuinely don't know how they actually built them. So I'd have to go back to like maybe like the middle of the building of the Great Pyramid to see what they were doing.
No, I I actually do really agree with that one because it's like, how are they still standing? How, just how? Like,
Yeah.
have you got a favorite book? It can be fiction, non-fiction, or both.
Mm. I'll go like in the middle and do like historical fiction,
Oh,
which is a favorite genre. And I'm going to say two if that's okay, because one of my like classic favorites is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Absolutely stunning. I'd recommend it to anyone if they haven't read it. And then also a newer book, which is Babylonia by
oh,
Constanza Casati. Have you read
yeah.
that one? Yeah. So obviously,
Loved it.
yeah,
Loved
just
it.
phenomenal, right? Because there's a lot now, isn't there, of ancient Greek and Roman reworkings, which I love. I'm well into them, but this is like that sort of vibe, but ancient Assyria and based on a real woman who we've only got like one line about. I love the historical note almost as much. I just read the novel first and then I read the historical note and I was just like, wow, that was a masterpiece.
Yeah. I loved that so much because I read her first book, Clytemnestra, and I was like, wow, okay. And then I read that and I was like, how's this surpassed that? Like this was
Yeah.
incredible. If you could invite any historical figure to a dinner party, who would it be and why?
Well, I feel like I should say Marie Maitland, right? But I would almost instead say Sappho because she's quite a mysterious figure. I feel like I know Marie quite well now. And also, like, the 16th century is not that long ago. So I feel like I wouldn't want to waste that on, like, somebody in, like, only a few centuries ago. So I think I'd go for Sappho, who's, like, centuries BC and quite a shadowy figure. So yeah, I'd like to meet Sappho.
And finally, have you got a favorite historical fact?
Yeah, one of my favorite historical facts is that in a small village in southern Spain, in Andalusia, it's a village called Teba, there's a memorial to a Scottish knight. And this is the good Sir James. So he was the right-hand man, warrior knight of Robert the Bruce. So our famous king, like during the Wars of Scottish Independence, 1300s. And he actually died in battle there against the Moors, so called at the time, in 1330. And but he obviously made such an impression on the local people there that they literally have a memorial to him in the center of the village to this day. And they have like a festival every year and he's celebrated. I just think that's insane that like the Scottish knight who died in 1330 is still so commemorated in this Spanish village. So I think that's quite cool.
No, that is actually incredible. Thank you so much for coming on today, shedding the light so much on 16th century Scotland and Marie Maitland, and also for your passion and dedication as well.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to her story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.